Hello and welcome to today's episode. We spoke with Kam Knight, and wow, it's quite intense, but it's a good intense because we talked about the brain, wants, motivation, dopamine, and some really simple tools. So it is a heavier or more intense topic, but it's something that pretty much every single human being comes across resistance. Now, I'm not talking about resistance training. I mean, I know we've all heard of that, but the resistance we put in ourselves when we are wanting to achieve something. We have the plenty of the wants or the motivation, but what about that resistance? And this is what we talk about, and the way the brain is working and the different ways that it helps us or stops us from doing something. So do listen. It is quite intense, but it's really useful because this is something I am sure you have come across. So it helps to explain that resistance is why you have that motivation, but it isn't happening. So grab a cuppa and come and listen to this conversation. And you might even have to listen to it a couple of times, but it should really help you with that resistance.
But I hope you will not resist me for encouraging you. Please subscribe and follow us wherever you get the podcast, wherever you're listening or watching us, wherever you're following us. Please hit follow, hit subscribe. If you feel like leaving a comment and supporting us, sharing your feedback, we would love to hear from you. But now let's find a way of how we can overcome any sort of resistance in our lives and get more of what we want. Let's go. Hi, Kam. Welcome to the show. How are you today?
Hi guys, I'm doing fantastic. How about you guys?
All good. We're so thrilled to have you on the podcast and to dive in into your journey, into your worldview, into your wisdom and expertise. But before we get into the nitty-gritty, I'm always curious to know a little different kind of a bio, a little different kind of an introduction, rather than reading your
hmm
resume. I'm always curious, obviously, who you are and what you do, but more importantly, what was the reason that got you on this path? What inspired you? Why have you decided to take the path that you are on, or stick to the path, or go deeper on this path? So, if you could
Yeah.
let us and our listeners know, obviously, who you are, what you do, but more importantly, why?
Okay, sure. So to talk about that, I'll first talk about the path that I'm on and then how I got into that path. And the path that I'm on is just going to be your standard bio, and then I'll go a little bit deeper. So my name is Kam Knight. I'm a coach, international speaker, and author of a dozen books, many of which you see behind me in the area of mental, physical, and emotional performance that have sold over 500,000 copies and have over 10,000 ratings on Amazon. Now I talk about a concept called internal resistance, and it answers a question I had my whole life, and that is, why is it if I want to do something, I know what to do, I know how to do it, and I have the motivation and desire to do it, but for one reason or another, I can't or don't do it. And how I got on this path is, for most of my life, I've been a fairly driven individual. And what I like to say is, it's hard not to be living in this culture, society, and even in our times with so much personal development content and everyone telling you to do more and be your best self and reach for the stars. But more importantly, now we have access to a lot more media, especially media of the people around us. And people around us are always posting the things that they're doing and having. And it's easy to want to do and have those things as well. So we become a lot more motivated to have more. And how it all kind of started is, when first moved to the US, I had parents who had really high expectations, but very low support. So there's a quadrant of high expectation, high support, low expectation, low support, but I was on the high with the low. And the part of the world that I come from is so starkly different from the US. It was a complete shock, culture shock. So growing up, I felt like I needed to be successful to be seen and heard and to matter. And so from the get go, I had a lot of motivation to do more, have more, and be more. And although I had my fair share of success, I feel like I missed the mark, and the success was much more difficult and stressful than it needed to be. So when I look at in high school, I had aspirations to get into an Ivy League school. And although I got into a decent college, I used what's called the backdoor method, where you apply into a very easy major. And then once you get into that school, you can switch to the major that you want. And then in college, I had aspirations to work for a prestigious either accounting firm or investment firm. And also, although I got a good job where I fit in with what I was doing, I missed the mark there. And it wasn't even in these big things, but in everything, dieting, exercising, different skills I wanted to develop. I would come in with a lot of motivation, and either I wouldn't start. If I did start, I'd end up getting distracted. If I didn't get distracted, I would stop before making progress. And if I didn't make progress, I sabotaged myself before getting to the end. And I did this over and over. And so this question kept coming up. Why is it if I want to do something and I know what to do and I know how to do it and I have the motivation, most important, why am I still not doing it? And so I've been on a kind of a path of one, understanding the answer. And now I'm more or less talking about and teaching. And that's one of the reasons I do these podcasts. I hope that was good. I know it's long, but yeah.
Oh, we can never have too long answers. So that
Okay.
was good. So thank you for
Perfect.
sharing and for explaining a little bit about your background and your where you're coming from. And it
Yeah.
is, we get up in the morning or the night before and you think, I'm going to do this. And then you either wake up or something happens in the morning and then, oh, I'll do it tomorrow. I'll do it tomorrow. And the
Yeah.
the want or the motivation is there, but it's almost like the motivation and the drive, or there's something missing. It's what is it? So this is something we've not necessarily dug into before with guests.
Yeah.
So it's really fascinating to get your perspective on it, because yeah, like you said in your introduction, there's so many books out there, podcasts,
Yeah.
YouTube channel, you name it, you can find it. You don't even have to leave your house or your couch. You can get it right there instantly. And there's a lot of books about the how-tos, or how to motivate yourself, or how to do something, or what you need to do or should do or achieve for, because this is something that we are often told to do, but yet the actual doing is very, very different. And it's different for everybody. Like you said, you had the high motivation, but not necessarily the
Yeah.
high support. So can you maybe go a little bit into what do you mean by support, or when you've got that
Yeah.
motivation, what is it that you have found maybe within yourself or with clients, or something, is what could potentially be that missing factor that's
Yeah.
not getting people to that point of, this is what I want, I have the motivation, and I know how to
Yeah.
do it. What is it
Yeah.
that's stopping me?
This is a fantastic question. And before I answer it, I want to riff on what you said. There is no shortage of information. Whatever that we want to do, we have the ability and the information to do it. In fact, now we even have ChatGPT and we can ask it, hey, I want this result. What do I have to do to get it? And the real challenge is, well, how do I get myself to do it? And you were saying, what is that missing piece? And what's really interesting is the people who can take action, or we all know people who are able to think about doing something or have a desire and they do it. And it's not because they have something, it's because they don't have something. And what they don't have is resistance. And so I'll kind of explain how this works, and it should kind of give us a good idea that can segue the rest of the conversation. So the part of the brain that creates wants and desires works separately and independent of the part that actually allows us to act on that desire. This is very important, so I'll say it one more time. The part of the brain that creates wants works independent of the part that actually allows us to act on the want. So we have one part of the brain that's creating wants, and in many ways, it's unrestrained. It's creating wants one after another. It was never meant to see if a want was achievable or worth going after. Its only job is to create wants. And in a lot of ways, it's cranking out wants one after another at a pace faster than any of us can achieve. And then we have another part of the brain that actually evaluates the want to see if it's worth pursuing and going after. And if this part doesn't give the green light, we cannot act. So, this is what I mean by people who can take action. It's not what they have, it's what they don't. They don't have this part of their brain holding them back. The people who aren't able to take action or it's a struggle have a lot of resistance. So, what is resistance and how it works? Well, it helps to think that anytime, so I will say before going into that, I want to say that it's possible for both the brain to create a desire for something and keep us from going after it. So, this is what people are experiencing. They want to do something, but they're not able to do it. And once you can understand the dynamic, it makes a lot more sense. So, why does resistance hold us back? Or why is it some people have less resistance than others? Well, to understand resistance, it helps to understand that anytime a desire comes up, this part of the brain evaluates it using a whole host of criterias. And if the desire, decision, or action is not in line with any of the criterias, resistance will prevent action. So it helps to think about standing before a panel of judges or board of directors. Every decision that comes up must go through them. And if even one of the members is against the idea, it will not pass. So then now the question becomes, well, what are these criteria? And this is where things get really interesting. And before I get into it a little bit, I want to say that the human brain and body are extremely complex. There's a lot of reasons for why we do things that are not able to do it. So it's not a simple cookie cutter thing, but it gets pretty involved, and we can talk about that today. But I'll kind of give some primers of what may be going on that's holding us back. So some of the more commonly things that hold us back that is talked about in personal development, or you may have heard, include things like beliefs. If a person doesn't believe something is possible or possible for them, of course, resistance will prevent action. Then there's habits. If we haven't built the habit for a task or behavior, resistance will also arise. And then there's comfort zone or the zone of familiar. Any time we do something, especially something new, by the inherent nature of doing something new, we're going to move out of our comfort zone. And the more resistive a person's brain is to moving out of a comfort zone, the more resistance will arise. Even if they could see that it's not dangerous to do the thing, the fact that it's going to be different from what they're already doing is enough to create resistance. So now these are some common reasons, but it goes kind of deeper than that. It could go into things like our self-image. So the way the brain is built, it's built to keep us in line within the self-image that we have formed or accepted. So if we have a self-image that we're cool, and being cool means we don't study, when we actually want to study, we can't because our brain is trying to reinforce the self-image, and studying goes against that. But it goes deeper than that. A lot of times resistance happens not because of the particular task or activity, but what finishing the task or activity will lead to or bring. So this is a common pattern in authors where they want to write a book, tell their story, and get their message out there. And they might even start writing, but then at a certain point, it gets harder and harder to show up and finish that book because their brain is resisting what will happen once they do finish that book. And it's usually feedback and criticism because once we finish the book, people are going to read it. And for sure, some people aren't going to like it, and their brain knows that, and they might be resistant to the feedback. But it kind of goes even deeper than that. It goes into things like core needs and core pains. And, I can talk all day about it, but I want to give you guys a chance to have the mic.
It's really interesting how you talk about the way the brain works. Because Lenka and I, we are both really fascinated with the brain, and
Yeah,
we look into neuroscience and all that, and it's the way the brain works. And as you said, our brains and our bodies are very complex, and
yeah,
they tell us things, or they, I'm going to say make us do things, but it's like make us
yeah,
do things. We can choose what to do, but a lot of it, as you said, is habits or the beliefs that we have, and then having to shift those in a different way and get our brain to,
yeah,
respond to different things or think a different way, or now, to use your example, to being cool is now we've got to adapt that being cool is to study instead of being
yeah,
cool is not to study. So it is
yeah,
shifting those ideas and shifting the way we think about ourselves or our beliefs, or
yeah,
even the abilities to do something. Because even though we might know the how to do something, there can also be that belief that I can't do it, I don't have
yeah,
that ability to do it. That's not necessarily true. You must We do have the ability, but you
yeah,
believe you don't have the ability, so therefore you can't do it. and
yeah,
and just the way the brain totally, leads us down these paths that
yeah,
are not necessarily true, because it's just something we've maybe picked up from childhood, or we've picked up along the way. Like you said, these beliefs, they're not necessarily the truth. They just what our brain is
yeah,
teaching us, or has this thought, I can't do this because
yeah,
X, Y, and Z, for whatever reason. So with that is, how can, with this resistance, and resistance is very different for everybody, can you maybe just go a little bit into what that resistance can feel like, or be, just to help maybe our listeners to understand when they are coming across the resistance? Because you might not necessarily know that we're coming across the resistance, because we're
yeah,
using an excuse or a reason, and not realizing that that is the resistance. So if you can maybe dig a little bit into what you see in and your experience has been, what that resistance can look like or even feel like.
yeah. So that's a very good question because a lot of times, unless you've heard this topic of resistance, you probably don't even know you're in resistance. So it helps to know what it's like. But before I go there, I do want to kind of springboard on a couple of things you said. There is a lot of motivation in the industry. They're telling you you can do anything you want. The mind is unlimited. And in a lot of ways, it's true, but it is leaving people high and dry because now that you're pumped with all this motivation and they have this desire, they've actually created more desire than the person had in the first place. And now they're still not able to do it. And I do believe in a lot of ways, this is kind of creating more problems than it's solving. It's leading to burnout. It's leading to people not feeling like they're good enough for what it takes because when they're told they can do anything and they're not able to, it leaves some really unpleasant feelings that, oh, others can do it, but I can't. So, this is something that's really important to understand. The other thing is beliefs as well. As I mentioned, beliefs is one part of the equation. There's so much more going on, like the habits, the comfort zones, the self image. And in my work, I found there's a good 2 to 3 dozen things, and there could be even more. So, and what's really interesting about beliefs is even though you can logically know the belief is false, that belief can still have a hold on you as if it's true. So, not most beliefs aren't necessarily true or false. It's just if it's true or false in your mind. And it's not just in your conscious mind, but your unconscious mind. So again, you could see somebody doing something and know that it's possible. And you could even say, hey, I am more qualified than a person, so I should be able to do it. But the resistance still holds you back from doing it. That's how strong resistance can be. So, how does resistance show up? How do people know they're in resistance? Well, there's a variety of ways. One is that they fall into avoidance behavior. And there's two kinds of avoidance behavior. One I call the obvious avoidance behaviors, and the other I call the tricks of resistance. So the obvious ones are things like playing video games, watching television, social media, maybe even drinking, smoking, and all of that. And I say it's obvious because when we're doing those things, we know we should be doing something else. Like when a student is playing games, part of him knows he should be like studying, but he can't stop playing that game. The tricks of resistance are a little bit more challenging because they can give the illusion of progress while just keeping you stuck. And I'll give a couple examples. So if a person is in resistance and and there's a trick coming up, it's usually one of many things. One, they'll find themselves in a heightened sense of over planning. They're planning all the things that they should do and how to do it and how not to do it. And all the time that they're spending on planning isn't time they're putting into the actual thing. And so it's a trick because the brain is having us avoid doing a thing that's actually creating progress, but it feels like we're making progress because we're planning. Something similar has to do with perfectionism. And I know a lot of people fall into this. They spend all their time dotting all their I's and crossing all their T's. And all that time they spent on perfecting something, it's time they're not putting it out there. And so it seems like we're being productive when the reality is we're actually just in a trick. But these tricks go deep because you had mentioned something at the start. Oh, I'll tell myself I'll do it later or I'll do it next time. Well, that's another trick. Anytime a desire comes up and we say, oh, we'll do it later, next time, tomorrow, next week, next weekend, our brain is putting it off for another day. And guess what? When that another day comes, we put it off again and we keep putting it off until we either forget about it or we're so busy, we just don't have time for it. So that's another trick as well. And these tricks go pretty deep. And by that, I mean, I say anything that is keeping you from moving the needle forward in that task, activity, goal, or your life is a trick. And that can involve even accidents and ill health. And usually, a person gets into the accident and health usually when as a last ditch effort by resistance, because we might be making progress and we're onto the tricks and it's not affecting us, and we're like at the crossroads of getting to the finish or the next step, and all of a sudden we find ourselves getting into an accident. Well, accidents take a lot of time and effort to manage, and that's the perfect trick of resistance because all that time and effort we're putting into, rectifying the accident is time we can't put on the goal and we end up losing progress. Same thing when we get sick. It takes out so much of our energy that we have no motivation to do anything. And since we can't do anything, we start to slide in our progress. So that's one way that it can show up is through avoidance behavior. And there's two types of avoidance behavior. One is um, obvious, and the others are tricks. But that's just if we fall into avoidance behavior. A lot of times, resistance can manifest in fear. Like we have a lot of anxiety and fear around doing the thing that we want. So oftentimes when I talk about that I teach resistance, the first thing that comes to my mind is, well, what's causing the resistance? Is it fear? And I say, fear is not the cause of the resistance. Resistance uses fear to keep us from doing things. So if we have fear or anxiety, it means that resistance has decided it doesn't want us to do that thing and is using fear and anxiety to keep us from doing it. So there's actually a bigger reason going on that we're not able to do it, and it's manifesting as fear. Other times, it can show up as things like criticizing. Have you ever criticized something, Natalie or Lenka? Yeah. Well, I will say when you criticize, it means you want that thing. We don't criticize things that we don't want. But the reason we criticize it is because it's what resistance uses to shut that desire down. Because as soon as we say something bad and say we don't want it, resistance wins in keeping us moving forward. But then it can also show up silently where we don't feel anything overt, meaning we're not in any obvious distractions, we're not in any tricks of resistance, we're not feeling any emotions, we're just not doing the thing. So it can be very silent as well. So hopefully that gives a person some perspectives on what it can feel like when we're in resistance or how it shows up.
So there's this saying, busy being busy, and that sounds like being busy is one of the tricks to you doing a lot of things that are not necessarily productive, but you feel like you're productive
Yeah.
because you're busy doing stuff
Yeah.
for it. So thank you for really, explaining that and these different
Tricks.
ways that
Yeah.
resistance sets in. But one thing, and I'm sure you've noticed that, is when that resistance is in, and you as you said, you've got the motivation, you want to do that, but when the resistance is, let's say, winning, and you stop, that then builds up a lot of like guilt or shame or these emotions that then make you not feel good, or you feel bad, you feel shame, you feel guilt because you've maybe said to somebody, this is what I'm going to do, or you've decided to do something, and then that resistance is in and you doing, whether it's the avoidance or the tricks or whatever is happening, is then you've got this shame and this guilt because you know that maybe you should be or could be doing that, but you're not doing it, and it can have this like spiral effect. And I get where
Yeah.
that the health can come in, because when you sit with a lot of shame and guilt, you can start to feel unhealthy. It feeds off your energy. It's you start to question things, and it can't be a good place. So if somebody's in this place of resistance and wanting to, is motivated to do something, but having this resistance, what can people do to help them to almost push through or find a way to deal with this resistance? Because as you said, there's so many different levels of it, but what can they
Yeah.
start to do to deal with it and push through to feel that they're actually doing something productive as opposed to keeping busy?
Yeah. So a lot of good things you've said. Yeah, so busyness is a sign of resistance. If we're just doing a lot of things and we're not moving in any direction, it can give the illusion that we're being productive, and it can even give us the right to feel upset at the world because we're not getting what we want. I'm trying so hard, but I'm not getting it. Yeah, you're trying hard, but you're almost purposely doing all the wrong things to not get that success. And then as far as that shame and guilt, yes, this is why I was saying earlier that in a lot of ways, the focus of the industry on motivation and inspiration is doing more harm and good, because when we can't take action and when we're told we have unlimited potential or we can do anything we want and we're not able to, it does create these feelings of shame and guilt. And this is where the complexity comes in, because if there's shame and guilt, then resistance will keep us, will try even harder to not do the thing. Because if we fail, then we're going to experience shame and guilt. And resistance is trying to protect us from pain. And if there's pain around shame and guilt, it's going to protect us from that feelings. And if that feelings come from not being able to do the thing, then it's going to keep us from doing it. So this is where the complexity comes in. It's like, okay, I will have this want. Resistance stops me. I feel shame and guilt. So resistance says, oh, we don't want you to feel that kind of pain. So I'm not going to I'm going to try even harder to keep you from starting, because if it doesn't work out, then this will happen, and we don't want to go down that road. So it gets pretty nuanced to the point where how the heck do you even manage all this? Especially if you don't even know what's going on in the unconscious or what's even causing it. And I have a really simple tool to get started with, though I do want to stress a couple of other things that we could do first is to, one, start with the tricks of resistance. Notice the tricks that are showing up in your life. Do you tend to overplan? Do you tend to perfect? Do you tend to get overwhelmed? Because overwhelmed is a sign of a trick of resistance too. Do you tend to criticize? Like when you're going out through the days, your mind going criticizing those things, and notice if you're criticizing, really you want that thing, but a part of your brain feels like you can't have it, it's going to be too difficult to have, or you feel too undeserving. And so your mind is pushing it away by criticizing. And so if we can notice the tricks, we can know that we're in resistance. And if we know we're in resistance, then we know that there's something that we want. Does that make sense? And if there's something that we want, we can analyze that want to see if it's something truly worth going after. Like, do I really want to put in the time and effort and my energy into this? Or is this just a want that my brain just created? Because as I mentioned earlier too, the wanting mechanism is unrestrained. It's just kind of creating want really relentlessly. And oftentimes when the want is triggered, we think we wanted it. And so we're chasing something that we don't even have the desire to pursue or have at the end of the day. And this is why a lot of people, when they get what they want, they don't feel satisfied because they didn't really analyze the want to really see if it's something they truly wanted or if it actually was going to be fulfilling. So this is, the framework that we want to work through. But again, it's a lot unless the person has a deep understanding of what's going on internally. It's not always the best place to start. What is a good place to start is self-talk. And I'm sure you guys have heard what self talk is, but for those who don't know, they are statements that you say or repeat to yourself of the changes that you want to have or have happen. For example, if I want to improve my memory, I can repeat self talk statements like, I have an excellent memory. I easily remember names, dates, facts, presentations, and more. Or if I want to improve my focus, I can repeat statements like, I have strong power of focus. I can focus on any task, activity, or goal. On the surface, these statements may not seem like much, but they're huge. And they're huge two reasons, especially as it relates to resistance, because if a person starts repeating, I have an excellent memory, or I remember anything I choose, the unconscious is going to react to that statement. It might say things like, no, you don't, you have a poor memory. And it might trigger times from their past where their memory wasn't good. Or it might trigger feelings of how people will respond if they find out that you do have a good memory. And all of those are signs of your resistance. If your mind says you have a terrible memory, that's your belief. You have a terrible memory. If it triggers memories of your past when you couldn't remember things, that's reinforcing the belief. If it is triggering other stuff, it's telling you data about why it feels like either you don't have a good memory or why it'll be hard to achieve a good memory. So that's a good place that we could start. And then if we continue repeating the statement, the reaction will eventually start to subside and it's not going to resist those statements, but start to accept it and internalize it. And we're naturally going to start acting out those statements. It's quite amazing, but a lot of times when a person wants to improve their life, improve a skill, or develop a behavior, they go out learning, applying, brute forcing, and all of that. When it can really just start with simple as self-talk. And as you had asked, what's a way someone can do? I like to start with the simple, and I think this can be very effective for both helping people understand what the resistance is, because they're going to get the data directly from their mind instead of us trying to figure out what could be the answer. And two, the very thing can actually help release the resistance and implant new programming that will make us act out the statements or the desire in a better way.
That was very interesting how you sort of you mentioned it, and you used the positive self-talk is reinforcing the positive self-talk as opposed to the negative self-talk. So thank you so much for explaining that and really showing showing us a way that we can move past some of the resistance and finding what it is that is causing that resistance within us. So thank you for those tips, because I think they simple is always good. It's we don't have to overcomplicate things, because simple works, and you've given us a really simple tool. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah, so I want to say something about the simple. Two main things. One is that when we're dealing with resistance, we have to take a very different approach to traditional methods and advice. So traditional methods and advice is trying to, put in as much effort to get maximum results. And if you can put in that effort to get the result, then that's great. But when we have resistance, it's nearly impossible to put in any effort, let alone consistently. So when we're dealing with resistance, it really helps to start with simple things that lead to big outcomes. Little things that you can do that can help make the bigger shifts. And in my personal experience, I haven't found anything that is as simple as self-talk, because you literally, all you have to do is move your lips. You could do it while lying down. You could do it like in bed before you're going to sleep, or right when you wake up. That's how simple it is. And when we start to rewire our mind, the action becomes easier. So it helps us make those bigger shifts. Now, there's other tools and techniques that we can use, but again, we start with the simple. And the second thing I want to say about simple is that when you look at anything anyone's done, success doesn't come by doing something, showing your A game a few times. It's achieved by showing up regularly. Whether we're trying to learn a language, whether we're trying to get better at baseball or football, whether we're trying to improve our communication, it's not like we go to a seminar and we learn all this information and all of a sudden, bam, we're this new person. We have to apply that information on a consistent basis. And it's the simple things that are easier to apply on a regular basis. And that's what's going to get results. And believe me, I tried the alternative. I followed what a lot of the experts and gurus and the coaches were saying. And don't get me wrong, they work. But if you're not the type of person that can put in a lot of stuff consistently, then it helps to focus on the simple things and just figure out a way to somehow do it on a regular basis. It took me a while to find a system and a rhythm for myself. And again, it goes back to the complexities of the human condition. What works for me may not work for you, but what I do know is whatever you're trying to get to work has to be done consistently.
I love this conversation, and I love this from the beginning where you were mentioning kind of two different parts of ourselves. How, I always say one of my favorite things these days is that we're running very modern software on a very old school hardware, that the body and mind and nervous system and the inner wiring that we currently are using as humankind is pretty ancient. And the amount of evolution we've done in terms of our society, our culture, our media, our lifestyles have been miles and leaps ahead of what our bodies have been capable of keeping up and changing and evolving. I think so often we feel like we're still devolving. And it always takes me back to neuroscience and understanding, as you were talking, that there are different things between, what we want versus what we are accomplishing. And the simple thing of the dopamine system is designed to drive the motivation, to give us dopamine, to move us forward, to make us want things and desire things and keep us going for reaching for these goals. But when we accomplish any kind of a goal, dopamine is not present. Dopamine is a future hormone, is a future chemical that only promises things. But when we accomplish something wonderful, we don't get dopamine. We get serotonin, we get oxytocin, we have different kinds of chemicals. They're wonderful, yet they're not as addictive or not powerful in the same potent way as dopamine. So often we feel disappointed, we feel let down. There's lots of depression for people who accomplish things. You achieve something and then you don't feel as elated as you thought you're gonna be, or you expected a croissant to be incredibly tasteful, and it's like
Yeah.
it's good enough, but there is this
Yeah.
whole error between the prediction and the reality. And I think we live in a world where we're always being promised and promised and promised and chasing, and then when the reality hits, so often we're so disappointed because we're not prepared for the reality to feel different, and we don't
Yeah.
have the coping mechanisms and realizations of the reality is going to feel different than the promises.
Yeah. No, this is really huge. I'm going to rip on a couple of things. So, yes, going back to the two parts of the brain, I used to wonder for a long time, or I used to think for a long time, whoever created humanity, whether it was God, aliens, or evolution, must have been really sick and twisted, because how could they do this to us? How could they create all these burning desires and then keep us from going after it and having to deal with the shame of guilt of not having it? But when you look at it from this model and perspective, it makes a lot of sense, because a part of the brain that does create the wants and releases the dopamine is not even at all res- a part of it allowing you to. And so the people who have been struggling now, they have a better answer. And yes, we are now living in modern times, and we're trying to implement modern software in old hardware. And that's a really good analogy, because this is what I've been trying to help people understand. You have to work within the limits of the brain and body. Like all my books, the reason they've been successful is that I'm not promising, what's the word? These big things that a lot of the others are, like limitless memory and things of that nature. There, we do have unlimited potential, but we still have to work within the limitations of the physical brain and body. And if we don't, this is where a lot of challenges are going to come. And because we have that old hardware, how it receives information, one, and how it internalizes information, two, but more importantly, how it gets us a result, three, or how we stick with it, we have to work within that. And if we think that because some expert said we can do anything, or all I have to do is follow these steps and I can get that result, and you can't find a way, and you're struggling to follow the steps, is because you're trying to use the steps or the software in an old hardware. So you got to figure out how to internalize that. That's why I say it helps to start with simple things that you can do consistently. And when you can start doing that, you can work within the old hardware to do the things that you're trying to do. And over time, you can build up to that. And so this is really good. And this would be a good time to talk about the challenges of our wants, because you talked about dopamine only promises things, but then achievement releases different set of chemicals or no chemicals at all. And we didn't get a chance to talk about the want, because it just seems like, oh, want, how could there be a challenge to it? Well, our own wants create challenges. And it's hard to believe, but our own wants and desires can be the very thing that keeps us from going after them. And there's many challenges our wants create, and I'll quickly summarize a few and talk about one of the most important ones. One is an overactive want, where the brain creates all sorts of desires all the time. It sees something and it wants it. It hears about something, it wants that too. Oftentimes, it doesn't have to hear or see anything, it just pulls us in all sorts of directions. Before we can start on one of the wants, it's pulling us towards other wants to chase. So, as you can imagine, this being a big challenge, our brain creates a desire. Before we have the time to even work on it or achieve it, it's creating other desires to chase. So we can't focus on any one. Then there's what I call strong wants, where the want is so big that it creates equal amounts of resistance. And I'm sure everyone listening here has experienced this, when they wanted something really bad and things weren't moving for them. And as soon as they let it go, things began to fall into place. And that happens because of a strong want. Then there's what I call a conflicting want. And this is really interesting because, as I mentioned, the part of the brain that creates desires is unrestrained. So it doesn't check to see if a want that it's creating conflicts with another want. So we can have two wants that are conflicting, meaning having one requires giving up another. But the way the brain works, it'll still keep create a desire for both. And for the people who chase both, end up achieving neither because it's impossible to have certain wants where you have to pick one. But then there's an unaligned want. And to understand unaligned want, it helps to understand that just because the brain creates a desire for something doesn't mean that our body will respond to it as much as we think or at all. In fact, it can respond to something completely different. And I'll give a powerful analogy. So let's say there is somebody who's watching the NBA or basketball, and he sees a player playing at a high level, doing all these really cool moves, making shots, and winning the game. Boom, that's going to create that want, like, I want to be like that. But then they go out to practice, and dribbling the ball feels awkward, the whole moving down the court and then trying to get a game and playing with others. It's just like an annoying experience. And so the body is not responding to that want the way the brain or the wanting mechanism made it feel. And so there's an unalignment there. Just because a brain creates a want doesn't mean going after it or finishing will create equal amounts of pleasure. And this is a lot of the challenges that we're experiencing as humanity because we want things and we're built to go after things, but then the very thing that we're going after is not fulfilling us, and we've put in all this time, even to the point of exhaustion, not being able to achieve it. And yeah, so I want people to be aware that just because your brain creates a want for something doesn't mean that it's going to be as fulfilling as it makes it seem. And so we have to, as rational human beings, be conscious of that. Like, look at how in our past the brain created similar wants and did it create a similar outcome or similar feelings? And if it didn't, then we have to say, is this really going to be fulfilling? Is this really going to help us get to where the wanting mechanism thinks it's going to help us get? I know I was kind of long-winded. I try to summarize the complex nature of wants, but hopefully people understand where I'm trying to get at with one, how wants can create challenges, and two, the importance of unaligned wants and being cautious of the wants that we're going after.
No, I think it was a wonderful kind of a summary and explanation of one of the, again, very confusing features of us human beings, where
Yeah.
our brain is lying to us so often in so many different ways. And the point I think you meant earlier with the self-talk, it's so interesting that how we can take this feature of our brain and kind of understand it better and use it not against it, but use it in alignment to how it works and get to where we want to go faster and easier, with understanding that our brain kind of doesn't understand negatives. That if we talk in I don't want this, I don't want this, our brain just hears want this and skips the
Yeah.
don't and focuses on the I want to this and this and this and ends up focusing on it. I always love the
Yeah.
analogy of, I think it's like a outdoor off-road skier or cyclist who,
Yeah.
instead of focusing on don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree, don't hit a tree, is focusing look for the path, look for what you want, look where there is space, look for the path. So it's kind of
Yeah.
a good reminder for our wants and for our brain to understand that we don't necessarily want to be focusing on the I don't want this, I don't want this, to be like, okay, I want this. And we can then use the tool to use the self-talk with understanding what is it that's happening in our brain? What are we talking about to ourselves? What is the narrative that we're telling ourselves? What is the language we're using to talk to ourselves when we try to motivate ourselves, when we're questioning ourselves, when we're judging ourselves, paying attention to that language and then flipping it again into something positive. And that's where in the latest years, I think the movement and the popularity of manifestation and affirmations have really been skyrocketed, because these people have tapped into the power of, if we focus on what we want and we keep telling ourselves that, there are then physiological events and there are things that we start doing more of. It's not like necessarily the universe is going to deliver to us, but
Yeah.
we are retraining our brain to look for ways to do it and reminding ourselves why we want to do it.
Yeah. No, 100%. And yes, the brain so often lies to us. And the challenge of it is it doesn't know that it's lying to us. It's kind of like when you go to ChatGPT now. I have clients who use ChatGPT a lot, and I would say, good 70 to 80% of the time it's helping them. But that 30 to uh, the 10 to 30% of the time, it's not, and they don't know it. And because they've gotten positive results, that first 70 or 80%, they just take everything it spits out as gold. And it's hard for me to compete with a couple of my clients because they're just so into what ChatGPT is saying, it's hard for them to hear me. And so it's kind of working the same with our brain. For the most part, our brain is doing a good job of keeping us alive, moving us forward, though that 20 to 30% of the time, it's actually derailing us and making it really challenging. And it doesn't know it's doing that. It thinks it's helping us. And so these conversations helps it to understand, oh wow, I didn't realize that I'm creating resistance or why I was creating resistance. And so just hearing this conversation can be very helpful. And yeah, that's why the movement of positive thinking is so helpful. Though I think it's gotten a little overboard where people just want to think positive and nothing else. We still have to address and look at the negative. And this is where the complexities and nuances come in because otherwise we suppress the negative. And people don't realize, but we are manifesting both consciously and unconsciously. So if consciously we're trying to keep everything positive, not have negative thoughts, it's great. But if we're suppressing all of that, then it's being manifested unconsciously. And I have a lot of clients who are very much on the positive thinking side and don't want to go to the negative. And I'm like, yeah, but look at your life. Like the negative is still manifesting, and all you're doing is suppressing and not really dealing with it. So again, remember when I said in the beginning, like this stuff is complex and nuanced, and I hope people are starting to understand how complex and nuanced it is. And so their challenges isn't because they're not good enough or they don't have what it takes. It's just that this is what's really going on. And again, going back to saying the one-sided information that is being presented is really designed to just stimulate our wanting mechanism to trigger that dopamine rush. Why is it designed to do that? Because once we can do that in a person, then they're more willing to buy. They're more willing to click like on our social media posts. They're more willing to comment. And then that just feeds the algorithm because the algorithm goes, oh, people liked and commented on this. We're going to show it to more people. And then the person creating that post goes, oh, if I create stuff that just releases dopamine, then that's what's going to, you know, get me more followers. So that's what they end up doing. And it becomes this feedback loop where now a majority of the content that's out there is very one-sided and it's not looking at the parts that are going to be the thing that really helps us towards what we're trying to achieve.
And everything is two-sided coin. You don't get a one-sided coin. Everything is
Yeah.
two sides, and to have that balance of the positive, but also understanding the negative and finding ways to deal with that. So thank you for really, starting us thinking about the nuances and as you said, the nuances and the complexities of just the wants and the motivation. And this is such a huge topic, and I'm sure we can be here for hours and hours, but you've really brought it in and explained it really well and given us some great tools. So if any of our listeners are thinking, you know what, I want to learn more or get hold of your books or just find a way to maybe reach out to you, where can people find you?
Yeah. So I want to first add that success, what I've learned in the decades of improving myself and doing this work, is success is in the nuances. It's all in the little things that you're not thinking about and likely haven't been told or even exist. And if there are challenges, it's because you're not looking at the finer things that another person is doing unconsciously. So I want people to understand that. So to find me, I've got 3 free gifts for the listeners. One called Instant Focus and Success, the other called End Procrastination and Sabotage, which is a deeper dive into this topic where they can learn Some of the other challenges our wanting mechanism creates, other causes of resistance, plus other tricks of resistance. And then a third guide titled Emotional Intelligence for Success, because all of the stuff that we talked about actually manifests in our emotions. And you talked about how can somebody be aware? Well, it starts with understanding your emotions. So they can get all 3 free guides on my website, kamknight.com. I have an entire program on internal resistance called Conquer Internal Resistance. They can get it at kamknight.com as well. And then if anybody wants to do one-on-one work with me, I developed a method that helps where I can take people into their unconscious mind. It's not NLP or hypnosis. It's something I've developed over the last 20 years. And it's the fastest, most direct way to work on a resistance. And they can reach out to me at coach@kamknight.com.
Thank you so much. And we will make sure that all those links are in the description below so people can click and find you wherever it resonates with them, wherever they feel like they are pulled to go and find you. So thank you so much for all of it. I love that we talked about quite complex topics today, but you really made them sound acceptable, understandable, simple, and practical. And we love practical stuff on this podcast. But we always try to squeeze in one last question to have a little bit more from our guests. And because the podcast is all about, finding more life in one's life, to figuring out how to live happily, healthily, more fulfilling lives, I'm always curious, what gives you life right now? It could be work, it could be life, it could be something funny and unexpected. But what it is that right now you feel like this is giving me life?
So I have a few things that's giving me life. And one of them is I do social dancing, salsa and bachata. And I really enjoy it because it is working within the old hardware. So the old hardware is we are humans, which means we're mammals, and mammals need physical contact and movement. And dance gives both of that, which really you might think you need to do these big accomplishments to get positive feelings, but literally you can go a night of social dancing, dance with various partners, move your body and get connection, and that's really what gives those satisfying feelings. The other thing that gives me equal is rock climbing. I got into rock climbing a few years ago, and when I was doing it, I remember when I used to travel, I've been to a lot of um, wild places like the Amazon rainforest, the um, the jungles of Asia, all places. And I saw a lot of monkeys, and when I would rock climb, I felt like, oh wow, I'm connecting to something like deeper part of me that just feels so natural. So that's what I do. Secondly, and then the third is yoga. I really like stretching. So those things really bring me a lot of joy and gives me the energy and what's the word? It fills me with the things I need to show up on a regular basis.
No, those are brilliant, and I love how you describe the rock climbing and
Yeah,
where how that inspires you. And dancing is a fabulous way to move and just, as you said, feel
yeah,
connected because you are dancing with different partners. So wow, it
yeah,
sounds amazing, and those are lovely, great things that you have. So thank you
yeah,
so much for sharing your knowledge with us today and sharing your experiences and perspective on how this resistance, sits within us and really digging deeper and but giving us a clearer understanding and our listeners a clearer understanding of this resistance and the brain and the wants and needs. So thank
yeah,
you so much for that. It's been really very informative, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners will get a lot of guidance from it and knowledge and something from it. So that's really great. So thank you so much for that.
yeah, no problem. I'm happy to provide the value. And yeah, if anyone wants to go deeper, they know where they can find me.
And I'm sure they will. So thank you. And for our listeners, what have you got from today? This was very intense topic whenever we're talking about the brain and dopamine and all that. It's not normally very light and fluffy. So It's quite an intense topic. Resistance is something we haven't dig deeper into in these episodes. So it's been really great to have something really new to talk about, and it's a different way of understanding ourselves and who we are and what can stop us from trying to achieve something or do something. So this resistance has been a really interesting conversation, and we would love to know your thoughts on it. How have you experienced resistance? Is this something that you are dealing with, have dealt with? We would love to know. Just reach out to us in the comments and let us know anything that you think about or have felt about or understand about resistance. But until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Bye.